Talanoa is a word that is derived from the Samoan culture, which means having a conversation. This word can also be broken into two. Tala means story, and Noa means to tie, which brings us to Talanoa. Utopia Washington has created Talanoa as a platform to provide safe spaces for our queer and trans-Pacific Islanders to have a conversation, share their stories, and for community members to make a connection. While Talanoa is usually hosted in person, due to the pandemic, Utopia Washington has been able to utilize digital platforms to bring you Talanoa virtually. We are glad to have you here with us today. Welcome to our Talanoa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for Utopia Washington's Telenova event. My name is Jeremiah Henderson. My pronouns are he, him, they, them, and I'll be facilitating our conversation today. Before we get started, I wanted to pass it over to Maddie Jim, one of our panelists who will be doing a land acknowledgement as well as a blessing.
Thank you. Yate she Maddie Jim and Shenash Ezidanential Kiani Bashin Tobata Shadot Sanachini National 8 out the national. Hi everyone, I'm Maddie Jim. I said my names and my name, also my clans of who I am and who I'm born for. So that way the holy people can know who I am when I say a blessing. I want to give land acknowledgement where I'm at. I'm actually on Tewa land in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So it's very important that we have land acknowledgement. So wherever you are, the people from your land, original people from your lands, give land acknowledgement all the time. So everybody on here is in different places. So if you could recognize and give honor to people of those lands. So I'm going to go ahead and say prayer in my own language. The Gonzling of the Bensa, the not the Chole, a Chayat Wanche, your Gay Sanshama, Sanat Leshma, Yodel Tase, Legistase, Tweltonashton, Tobiage, Kadinishki, and it oniet, a Saana Rapik a Hojon. The hand edition should be in the Neti Kuasa Legido, Beyat Gido, Art a Bainant Hinigida, a hand edition show, Ado de Con, Beyat Gido, de Con. Shik is coin ye yadastigi a hand edition. Shabik it didn't eat but J shabit that was cheat ado in sa casey betzilo be yadel tieto. A hand edition shidi in the net the art a chiando dinsley gate what out dinsley gate art a benasi kaigi had the art the punity dates anigi punity shono nakego shabata but the house young shonia art and that place. So hand edition shidi in the net. وجنها sleep. Okay.
Thank you so much, Maddie. And before we get started, I wanted to take some time for myself as well as our lovely panelists to introduce ourselves. So my name is Jeremiah. My pronouns are he, him, they, them, and I'm a fierce Black and Native queer trans man from the Confederate Tribes of Siletz Indians, Nimipu tribe, and the Ogallala Sioux tribe. I am joining you all from my ancestral land here in Portland, Oregon, where I am an incoming MD and PhD student at Oregon Health and Sciences University. Before moving to Portland, I had the pleasure of serving on Utopia's board as co-chair and organizing with amazing BIPOC community and chosen family. I'm extremely passionate about the liberation of Black and Native folks, specifically queer, trans, and two-spirit communities. I have had the opportunity to work in public and nonprofit organizations leading LGBTQ policy advocacy, as well as public education. And for an icebreaker, when the other panelists introduce themselves, the question that we have for folks to answer is name an animal or fish that can be found in your part of the water/lands and talk about its features and why it's important to you and your culture and community. So for myself, for the Sioux folks, they're Plain Indians. An animal that's really dear to us is the buffalo, also known as tatanka. It was, traditionally the animal was used for our main source is food, as well as for the hide was used for clothing and shelter. Every part of the buffalo was used, and our tribe would follow the buffalo throughout the year. And so we had a very close connection with the buffalo and our tribal community. And so I will pass it on to our panelists to introduce themselves as well.
Hi and Bolovinaka, Pacific greetings. My name is Amasai Cheke, and I'm from the beautiful island of Fiji, and I currently reside here in Seattle, Washington. And I also wanted to say happy Holi to everyone. Holi is also a celebration. It's a celebration of colors, and also it celebrates the triumph over good over evil, and it's celebrated today around the world. And the fish, I think for me, it's gonna be the shark, what we call nangio, which is also a traditional meaning of the fish. The shark, the nangio, is also known as one of the gods, the strongest gods in Fiji, Dakuanga, and it's also respected within some villages in Fiji, where where they don't eat sharks because out of the respect of the gods. But some do enjoy the white flesh meat of enjoying sharks, and they do taste good. And yeah, thank you.
Oh, I'll go. My name is Kiva. Aloha. I'm coming to you from the Big Island of Hawaii. My mountain is Mauna Kea. Our water source is the Wailuku River. The name of our rain is Moaniani Lehua. I'm coming to you from the Puna district of Hawaii Island, where here I am the Director of Harm Reduction Services at Kumukahi Health and Wellness. I've been living on this island for the last year and a half. My family comes from Oahu and from Maui and from this island, Hawaii Island. I lived in Oahu for over 20 years, where I was the linkage to care coordinator and community engagement coordinator for the Hawaii Health and Harm Reduction Center, which is really where I started my career in community service work. I'm a member of the Positively Trans National Advisory Board, and I sit on the network of the National Native HIV Network, where I serve the Pacific region. I also do a lot of advocacy and consultation work around the country with my cohorts across the country, and I'm really proud to be here with all of these beautiful Native folks. So thank you for having me. Aloha no. I pass it off to my sister, Maddie.
Thank you. Yate again. Hi, everyone again. I'm Maddie Jim. I gave you my clans already. Clans are very important in our culture in finding out who our relatives are. Even if it's not by blood, it's by clan system. So that's how I always introduce myself. In case there's people in the audience or in a room, I could have relations by clan system. I currently work for First Nations Community Health Source in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I've been doing HIV prevention and trans advocacy for over 20 years. I got sober 26 years ago, so I had a lot of time on my hands, so got busy in that. So I've been doing a lot of work. I also currently sit on an advisory council, the Southwest Indigenous Women's Coalition Native LGBTQ Two-Spirit Council, also with TLC, with their national coalition. I also am a board member for Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico here in Albuquerque and have emeritus status. And so I do a lot of advocacy stuff, and also currently with the U.S. Trans Survey Native group, and looking at rolling out the U.S. Trans Survey 2022, which is coming out in May. So part of that, and then also one of the biggest things that I am a part of right now is the New Mexico Missing Murdered Indigenous Women's and Relatives Task Force, which I'm a co-chair for their Community Impact Subcommittee. So I have a lot on my plate, and that's just some of it, the more important ones. So I do a lot of consulting and other stuff too. So. And the animal that I choose, even though we honored animals, four-legged ones, and also flying ones. I'm going to pick deer. I know deer is relevant in some tribes where the deer hide is used for clothing, the deer meat is used, and ways of eating the deer meat and how we eat deer meat. So from what I've heard when I was younger and what I was taught, I try to carry on those teachings too. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Jeremiah, can I do my animal question?
Oh yes, of course.
I forgot to add my animal.
Yes.
I'm going to piggyback off of Amasai. The minute that I was asked a question about what sea creature or fish I thought of outside of my sisters, the real fish of Hawaii. We, there's a special relationship that we as Native Hawaiians have with the shark, the mano. Um, uh, all over the world now, you're seeing these tribal tattoos, and you see these particular uh, pattern of these triangles pointing outwards, and really that's the nihomano. And the nihomano is really a sign of protection, and that's why you see it often in a lot of our art, our Polynesian art. And it is the same definition in Native Hawaiian terminology, that nihomano is really reflective of asking for protection. And usually that nihomano is surrounding things like the spine or the skin, or significant emblems of someone's family. And so that just goes to show you how important we look at the shark. Also, the mano is, when I think of the mano, I think of Kamohoali'i. Kamohoali'i was or is one of the siblings of Pele. Pele is one of our deities, the goddess of fire and the creator of our land and earth, or the cultivator of our land and earth. And the story is that Pele was exiled from Tahiti, or from Kahiki, and she was set out to find a new place to live. And her brother, Kamohoali'i, the shark, a navigator through the ocean, led her to the Hawaiian Islands. It's also believed that Kamohoali'i is a guide in the ocean for people that are lost. If you are lost at sea, the mano can show itself, and if there's a kahuna on board your vessel, and that kahuna throws that mano some ava, that mano will wave its tail and guide that person back to land. And so there's a lot of significance to the mano. He is the amakua, or the spiritual, kind of like spirit animal to many families across Hawaii, including my own. And so, yeah, we hold the mano in deep reverence. So thank you for that question, because it made me have to think.
Thank you so much. So our conversation today is Indigenous connections to the land. And so our first question is, what is the importance of land acknowledgement? And more specifically, as that practice becomes more recognized, what are meaningful ways that folks can express their gratitude for Indigenous communities without it being performative? And what is your thoughts on the practice as well?
My elders would want to go first.
I kind of think that's me. Yikes. Maddie.
Okay, I'll go first. I'm turning 50 next month.
See, we don't look at Seth.
Thank you. So for me, the importance of land acknowledgement is, I think, very important. Just like I said earlier, like we recognize what tribes or what people are from certain areas. And for me as a Native person, even when I travel, I want to know where I'm going, and also who were the people of those lands. So that way I'm familiar with that too. And then also try to read up on history or read up on culture, and what the do's and don'ts are, because I don't want to disrespect another tribe. And I think with land acknowledgement, like my people, in our prayers and our songs and in our teachings, we talk about the four sacred mountains. and also those are in our songs and our prayers also too. So being in between all the four sacred mountains is a blessing for our people, and that's where my people are from. So if I were to be on my people's land, which is about hour and a half, 2 hours away from here west, that I would give that land acknowledgement to and say this is where I'm from and this is my people's lands and this is where we come from. And I think also with land acknowledgement too, as an individual for myself, the teachings of like when somebody's born, like we the umbilical cord would be buried where you're from. So a lot of a lot of my our relatives and my older relatives have done that. And with westernization, that's kind of like going away. But that was the teachings that were taught to us. You go back to where your umbilical cord was buried, and that's where your home is, and that's where you can go and either heal or go and be a part of the family or go home and be home. So there's a lot of significance in that land acknowledgement. I feel just coming from a greater whole of people and also individually as yourself.
Yeah, and then thank you for sharing that. And I share the same sentiment as you when you said about planting the umbilical cord. And I'd remember growing up, my grandmother would tell me, "Oh, you know that lemon tree outside the house? That's your tree because we planted your umbilical cord in the lemon tree." I was like, "Oh my god!" And every time when it got bigger, and people used to pick lemon trees to make tea, and I'm like, "No, don't touch my lemon tree. That's for me." And over the years, growing up and having to understand the deep and huge connection that we have as Indigenous people around the world, it's so amazing. And even prior to having this conversation, like I was feeling so overwhelmed to see that there's a huge need where we have people like Keva and everyone here having this very important conversation, because I see there's a huge disconnection now as a young person with the land, and there's the need to continue this conversation so that I'm also learning at the same time. And I know land acknowledgement is very important as Indigenous people because it recognizes the uniqueness and the enduring relationship that exists between us as Indigenous people and our traditions within our territories. And it also commemorates the fact that we as Indigenous people have not and cannot be raised, as people as owners of the land. And I know back in Fiji, one of the ways of when we go into a new village or when we go into somebody's house, we have to introduce ourselves, like where we're from, my village, my province, um, and what's my fish, what's my tree, and what's our. And then there's different ways where we introduce ourselves. Oh, so you're my, so we related through that in different ways. And I know I'd remember in a particular village in another big island in Fiji called Vanuatu, whenever they go into people's house, they have to call out before they enter the house. They say, "My nawandue." It's like, "Welcome, we're here." And to me, every time, oh my God, that's like so special. Like, it makes me more proud being Indigenous because there's so many ways where we go into different places and we introduce ourselves as, Indigenous people. So to me, it's a big connection as, Indigenous people when it's so important when we acknowledge the land that we live on. And, as a young transgender person who is um, making waves throughout, lives, to me is important as much as we have to acknowledge the land that we live on and to take care of the land that we live on because it's also the same land that I'm also transitioning as a young transgender woman. The land that needs to be healthy, that's also taking care of me as I transition in this world. Vinaka.
Yeah, I must say thank you for that. It is, and there was a part of that question, Jeremiah, where we talked about how do we not be so performative with our land acknowledgements, and and I think that is the the beautiful part of our cultures, all of ours, we come from different parts of the Pacific and from Mokuhonu and or Turtle Island. And that is the special part of who we are, is that we're performers, honey. We when we show up as guests in other parts of the world, we want to bring every piece of what we know and what is our life to the places that we visit. And so we carry on the names of our kupuna, and we talk about the names of our winds, and we talk about the names of our rain and our rivers and our mountains. Because when I walk into a space where I'm new, or when I walk into a space where people may not know who I am or where I'm from, I want them to know how special these places are. And when we speak the names of our kupunas, and when we speak the names of our wind and our rains and our sacred spaces, I think what it does is it holds a certain reverence to it, in ways that it's not performative. I mean, I think that we've learned unperformative ways to acknowledge our land throughout COVID. You know, when we've had all this time to be at home, to be isolated, to not have so much social activities, we really went back into the land and learned about plants and learned about birds and learned about insects. I have so many friends that started gardens. That's a land acknowledgement. That is this piece that we get to take what is this treasure of our people, the land where our ancestors were raised and generations of our own families had come before us, and make something that feeds us and feeds our families and feeds our neighborhoods and feeds our friends. And I think that that is probably the most important part of all of our native cultures, is that we recognize that as a community of people. We recognize that in our culture. We sing about it, we dance about it, we share about it when we introduce ourselves. And what that really does is it shares with people that really have lost that part of their custom, to acknowledge the places where they come from and say, hey, it helps people to rethink that performance that we give, that holy that tells you that I'm about my winds and my rains and all of that. It really gives people a different kind of responsibility of where they're from, to say, hey, let me think about this. Where was I raised? Who were the people that took care of that place before my family got there? It makes and it broadens that idea that not just Indigenous land, because at one time all of it was Indigenous land, right? And it just gives us that idea that we have a responsibility to find out about the generations before us. I was born and raised in the California Bay Area, in a city called Richmond, and it was a concrete jungle. Didn't see a lot of dirt. You didn't see a lot of fresh gardens and people cultivating their land. You didn't see that. So, you know, we didn't get the opportunity to really kind of like build a relationship with that land. But I recognized when I came home to Hawaii, this is what my family did. We olied ourselves into these sacred spaces. We olied ourselves into our family's homes to let them know like who we are and where we came from, and that we remember who we are, where we came from, even though I was growing up in the hood. I remember, you know, one of my best friends was born and raised in a homestead called Papakolea, and it's just above Honolulu on Oahu. And we were sitting out across the street from her grandmother's house, and there's these two huge mango trees that grow in her grandma's yard. Her grandma's 92 years old. And she told me that all of her cousins and all of her father's siblings, their umbilical cords are buried under those two trees. And I get chicken skins to when I talk about it, because the amount of pride and responsibility that you have to that place, because you know not only your kino, your body is there, a part of you is there at that tree at your grandmother's home in Papakolea, where your family has been for generations, but those of your siblings and those of your cousins and those of your parents' siblings. And it just gives us a different kuleana, a different responsibility to make sure that that place is safer. so that that legacy continues on.
Yeah, so true.
I love that about our people, that we recognize those things. I think it's something that is missing in the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. Like I'd remember like having a conversation with this paramount chief from Fiji, who's so phenomenal, and she told me that in her village, one of the most, which is one of the most traditional and chiefly island in Fiji, where people in the village th- they have certain clans who would go and spend 4 nights out in the land. I mean, out in the woods, making the chief's outfit. They'll be there 4 nights carving and using the land, using land and everything around it to make the chief's clothing. And after the fourth night, they would come out the next day and present that clothing to the chief. And to me, it's like it's so powerful, even just to hear her say that, and how they have certain clans in different villages in Fiji that were responsible for weather. If there was a bad weather, and then there's a chiefly ceremony, they would come and touch the ground or point up to the sky, and the rain will stop. And I'm like, wow, it's such a big connection just having it without with I mean, listening to our elders and how deep the connection was.
Yeah. Um, Amasai, I like what you said about introduction, especially like greeting family. You just made me remember even in ceremony.
Mm,
Sometimes we sit in ceremony and during break, or if we're waiting on people, the medicine person like sometimes asks like where are you from, or who are you, and just saying who you are and where you're from, and just having that dialogue, because what do they call that, 6 degrees of separation, where somebody knows somebody, or
yeah.
they know somebody of the family, or they know somebody from there, or something. So that's how it is in ceremony also too, in that connection on how things are also too.
Yeah, thank you, Maddie. That resonates with me so much. I think about like so many times being asked like where am I from and who's my grandparents as like a way of connection to not only land but family. But one of the things that I just wanted to ask as a follow up to that is like here in the Pacific Northwest, a lot of times at non Indigenous led events that folks will do a land acknowledgement of like the land that they're on. And so I think in this sense of that, like when non-Indigenous folks are doing that, how can they make sure that they're doing more than just a land acknowledgement? Because I think about one of the things that happened a couple of years ago when the bodies of Native American youth were being discovered at different boarding schools, and how surprised people were. To me, it really like hurt me because I was like, you all be doing so many land acknowledgements, but you don't know a piece of history that is so essential to like my life, my mother's life, my great grandfather who is a boarding school survivor. So I guess like in that sense, how can folks be doing more than just a land acknowledgement when they're hosting events for
I personally think that you need to include somebody from that part of the land. It's very important. I know that there have been times where, like, somebody was invited, but they end up reading something on paper, which I feel is not good. It's a no-no. Having somebody there from their tribal lands, speaking about their land, speaking about their people, I think is very important, because that voice not just brings honor to the people then and there, but the people from past generations, because they are speaking for them also too. So I think in getting it right, inviting somebody from the land, or networking with somebody who might know somebody of those lands that could possibly help out in finding somebody. Yeah, what I'm finding now is that some of the meetings, they are doing land acknowledgements, and I'm really happy that they're doing that. And then another thing is that I'm seeing organizations actually um, put up like a plaque that states the land acknowledgement on what land that they are on. So I'm starting to see that also too, which I think is a great idea, in putting it in organizations in different spaces.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point, Maddie. It's really important to get it right if you're going to have that, to intentionally do a land acknowledgement. And in any space, whether it's a space where you're planted and you're doing work there every day, Monday through Friday, or 7 days a week, or however it goes, that you acknowledge the native people of that place, not the first settlers, but the original settlers. Um, and and have it on a plaque. I mean, I would love to go to a conference and see that this is something that was dedicated to this space. That amazing, great work is being done here at this moment, and we want to call on the people that took care of that space, so that we have the opportunity to be there to create this great work today and now. Um, that's a beautiful piece of culture that is missing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also, I think a year ago, I attended right after the COVID had passed, and then people starting to move around. And a friend of mine came from Fiji to have his first ever fashion show here in America. And to me, the most emotional part of it was that he had um, he had his first show. The opening was to pay respects to the land that the show was where we had the show on. I was like, wow, this is really like really beautiful. And then so on, the show went on, and it told a talent. It was almost having a Talanoa session. He paid respect to where we were, and then he paid homage to where he's from, his connection to Fiji and Hawaii. I was like, oh, it's like, to me it's really beautiful that, like, and I share the same sentiment as you both, where it's very important, and it's paramount that we have land acknowledgement, especially to have someone who is native to that land, to kind of open and before anything else.
And
I
I think
think it's so hard. Sorry, Maddie, go ahead.
I think also to add to that is that a lot of times, even if you're in an urban setting, like a big metropolis, a lot of times people think, oh, they weren't here, or this is a big city, that and stuff. But where were the buildings built, and how were the indigenous people moved out from where all these buildings are now too,
Yeah.
and not just here, but also the islands too. And how did they make space, and also how was the land taken? How was that land taken? So
Mhm.
acknowledge.
That part. That
Mhm.
part. I was in New York City a couple of weeks ago, and I was sitting on I think we were on the 15th floor of our hotel, just looking out across Midtown Manhattan, and there's just so much there. There's like people everywhere, a million cultures, a million windows, a million feet in the sky, and I'm just like, what was it like? And I remember watching a YouTube video about the birth of New York City. Um, and so I just was kind of like trying to imagine like what that place looked like uh, when it was native, when it was just the people and the land. Um, and I remember telling my friends like that thought, like, can you imagine what it looked like when it was just all native people walking around and taking care of their daily responsibilities here? And he said, this was all swampland. And I got so mad. I got so mad. I said, no, it was not all swampland. What do you think we're standing on if this is swampland? This is all
Exactly.
and
Right?
I'm like, why don't we know these things? Like, we can't keep watching YouTube videos to learn these lessons, Like, I learned about New York City, and it was apples, and it was tobacco, and there was a lot of different things that were grown there. Um, and they had a lot of harsh weather, and so these were really strong uh, huis of people that lived there and learned how to live and thrive in this really rough part of the country.
Yeah.
Um,
Hence the
and
tribe
those stories need
Manhattan,
to be heard.
the Manhattan tribe.
The Manhattan tribe.
Yeah. And
Um,
then also, I know that when I did a little bit of research in Brooklyn, there's ancestral lands there too, where downtown Brooklyn is. And I was like, wow. And I would also think that too. Wherever I go and travel, I think about that. Like, how were our people before colonization happened, before these big
Mhm.
buildings and stuff, and how they were thriving or how they were traveling, and we got around, we did things, and it's interesting how like even our history is kind of erased,
Yeah.
in a sense,
Yeah.
where they're not acknowledging those things.
We don't always need to see statues of like George Washington and Christopher
Yeah.
Columbus and Paul Revere, and like I want to see statues of Native people that were there first, and what did they do, what were their daily responsibilities, and how
Yeah.
did they help their community.
Yeah, I think for me, our statues are our mountains where we're from, and just the cliffs, or even just the description of where sacred lands are also too, is how I look at those statues. But I agree with you. I think
I love that.
having
Just
having
hearing
actual
just hearing Mate say, how deep connected we are, and I think about we would sit around in circles and talk about um our people before and the connection with the higher power, and how that looked like. And now, particularly in Fiji, it's a very religious country, and anything to do with that, it's looked at as, oh, that's evil, that's bad spirit. Like anything to do with traditional power and knowledge, oh no, we you have to stop practicing that. And to me, it's problematic because it's whitewashing, and that we can no longer practice you know what our ancestors did, because it's because we're not allowed, because the Bible says this and we can't do that. And then I would say, what if our ancestors were worshiping the same God but in a totally different way, but it was connecting with a higher power, whatever it is, and they called it God. And it's so like, if and to me, the colonization has just taken too much away from us. And I think it's time that every time we do things, especially with land acknowledgement, that we always have to think, we always have to decolonize the way we think now, and it's important.
Yeah,
I
thank you.
I it's so hard to as a Hawaiian, as we learn about our history and the history of our leaders, and in those times where we were being colonized, and missionaries came and tried to convert us over. Um, the more that we learn about our leadership, at that time, our ali'i, our chiefs, sometimes they get so conflicted. There's a story of Keopuolani, who was one of Kamehameha's wives. She was actually one of not one, but she was his highest ranking wife. If I'm not mistaken, he had to crawl to her. Kamehameha had to crawl to Keopuolani because she was higher ranking than he was. Um, and when she passed away, she, on her deathbed, she was adamant that she not be buried and not have ceremony in native Hawaiian style, but really um, she wanted a Methodist services, and she wanted to be recognized as a religious woman and Christian. And she went as far as, calling her own people pagans, and she went as far as saying that her kupuna, her ancestors, would be proud of her for rejecting this really heathenistic lifestyle that Hawaiians had. And when I read about this in Keopuolani, who was somebody who was always thought to be, this amazing ali'i and this beautiful princess, and the wife of our greatest king, I just was like, bitch, like, no, you didn't. And so it's sometimes when we're learning about our culture, it's really hard to kind of grab on the good parts of our leadership, who were there when all of this kind of transition, this deathly and really dangerous transition, was happening to our people, and the role that they played in embracing colonization, um, and the role that certain leaders played in rejecting it. Um, but yeah, I that was just a recent lesson I had in Keopuolani, and I
Mhm.
just was like, yikes! I always liked her. Damn her! What did she
And,
do that to
and then
us?
I think also in what we learn also too. This is how I saw it too, because for me, like I had to learn my history myself,
Yeah.
not from school books, not from textbooks.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't teach us in world history. I learned about the massacres, the genocide of our people, and the horror stories that went with it on my own, and just putting it together. And one of the things that we do in some of our presentations is tell our participants that anthropology is one-sided, their side. If we had anthropologists back then who could document and write down our stories and our side, it'd be totally different, and we would know, and it would be taught. But unfortunately, it's coming from their side. I think with all the books that have been written, scholar articles that have been written, it's a lot more from a Western anthropologist point of view rather than our own. So if
Yeah.
our own native people wrote that, I think the whole scenario and then the whole story would be different. And also, it would be the truth.
Yeah. You know, there's that old saying, history is written by the winner. Period.
Thank you all so much. So for the next question, would you all be able to shed light on some of the cultural practices that your communities do to uplift and empower your Indigenous communities?
Um, I can start. I think there's a lot that's being done now. There's a lot of great schools that are incorporating language and culture, and it has been going on for years. But I think they're taking a real big initiative to fund cultural teachings for our younger generations to come, and also it all depends too on what side of the reservation you are on, because my tribe has over 300,000 tribal members, and we're the size of West Virginia, which is huge. So for me, I'm actually from the Eastern Agency, which is on the eastern side of the Navajo reservation, and the western part is like maybe 5 or 6 hours away. So a lot of the teachings are being incorporated, and I think even in the ceremonies, I think it's empowering. Like for me, I'll use my story as an example. My mom and dad went through boarding school, and we only spoke English in our household throughout getting raised. So I learned my culture, my language. I started learning my culture, my language from an elderly home where I worked at for 10 years. So that started my self education on who I am and where I come from. So I asked a lot of questions. So for me, when I was growing up, and throughout, I think it was middle school, Native kids were being teased of speaking their language, and they would like demean them and say, "Oh, you're Resi," or "You're from the res." So I didn't want that to happen to me. So I perfected my communication skills. I wanted to talk English and not have broken English. So I kind of jumped on that bandwagon and stuff, and took on that label. And after high school, I think starting to learn that and starting to speak it, I thought differently. I wanted to learn my language. I want to learn my culture. I'm learning my songs at the ceremonies. I'm learning about the prayer. I'm learning a lot of things. I'm not a medicine person, but I am a member of my tribe that I'm learning, relearning things. So for me, that's empowering. Um, I used to think that somebody who had a PhD, doctors, lawyers, were held, for me, held in high regard, and they were the top of the pedestal and stuff. But I don't think that way anymore. Somebody who speaks my language and my culture, somebody who could teach me my language and tell me about the stories and the ceremonies and how they're linked together, and even has broken English, I hold them up on a pedestal because they are who I am and where I come from. And the word that we use is dene, meaning of our people. And for me, that's being of our people and learning from them. I have a lump in my throat just talking. And for me, I hold that person in high regard, and would love to sit down with many more and learn a lot more stuff if I could in the rest of my life. So empowering myself, I think also is a true testimony that others can do that too. The younger generation can keep the teaching going, or teach others in that sense, and not fall into that whole craziness, and also practicing lateral oppression or lateral stuff, and that happens within our tribal communities. sometimes even when you're trying to learn, sometimes like people are told that, well, you're not saying it right, and people get mad at them. But how do we teach them? I recently saw a TikTok where this woman was talking about that, and even though it stung a little, I was a part of that group that did that, and I was a part of the group that I've done that in the past. But hearing things from an elder and saying, okay, so how do we teach our younger ones? If they say it wrong, how do we help them to say it right? What are the right words? And even when there are phrases that I need to learn, I try to reach out to somebody and learn those phrases. So I
Yeah.
think empowerment comes in different forms and different ways. So I'll stop babbling and pass it on.
And I think I also think about like in Fiji, one of the things, to us is the land, but also it's also about what we call Ngolingoli. It's it's a cultural practice when it comes to our fishing grounds. There's certain ways where when a chief dies, we can't, no one's allowed to fish in the ocean for till the 100 nights. After the 100 nights, and then we have what we call Nangon and Dao, those the fishermen, the chief fishermen, where then when then they go to the sea to when they finally allow you to fish after 100 nights of the chief's death. And there's also some sort of practices that's done where certain fishes are not to be fished during certain period of time, and how different people play different roles in that. And I also think about I was having a conversation with a trans sister here, and then we were talking about, are we disconnected from home because we live here in America, and is it two different stories now? And then I would say, there's no such thing as we're disconnected. Wherever we are as Indigenous people, we're connected through the land that we stand on, and also that our lived experiences are not are not different from those that are at home. And what it is that is shared is that we share the same common grounds of our lived experiences are the same, as Indigenous, queer, trans people, living, whether we're in home back in Fiji, or wherever we are, or living here, in a foreign land, is that we're connected by the ocean, we're connected by the land that we stand on. And I would remember here, particularly Fijian communities here in America, very helpful. Being so coming to America was a scary thing for me personally. Coming to America, oh my God, such a big place. What do I do? Where do I start? And knowing that there's a huge community here who will help you no matter what. And to me, to still see the love and care that we have for each other, for people, for our own people, that's a big thing. And to see the mana, the love, the loloma that we have for each other as Pacific Island people, no matter where we are. And to me, that's powerful when we acknowledge each other in so many ways.
Yeah, yeah, Amasai, that's beautiful. I like how you say that, because my family was part of the Hawaiian diaspora, where in the 60s, my grandparents moved my mother and her 8 brothers and sisters to the West Coast, in the Bay Area, for a better life. They thought that there was better opportunities for education and for their family to be able to have more financial gain. And so we left Hawaii when my mom was a teenager. Um, and I personally have been connected to culture since I started dancing hula at 3 years old, and it has constantly been a part of my life. Through the different journeys that I've had with substance use, and then discovering about how to like navigate the world as a transgender woman, not a mahu, but as a transgender woman. I still had to incorporate I had to incorporate hula into who I was, and it kind of healed me at the most stressful times, and it soothed me when I missed my family. It comforted me when I missed home, and so I understand that disconnection, that feeling far away from home, from Hawaii, and I feel that from my cousins. And as we get older, and as they have children, the disconnect gets wider, right? And so, part of what I feel like has been my responsibility or my kuleana to my family has always been to like make sure that we know our culture, make sure that my cousins and their babies really have a connection of who they were and where our people came from, what our language means, because I don't want to see that lost in my family. And I think that this is the part of where my professional work as an advocate and as a community service worker and around HIV and around transgender needs, really those skills come to play because there's a lot of advocacy and really there's a lot of activism that needs to happen within the Hawaiian community here at home in these islands. And I've learned those skills because of my experience in HIV and because of my experience as a transgender woman. And I can take those experiences and walk into my cultural space and walk into my people as a proud mahu and be me and not be afraid of what people might be thinking or what people might be of their opinions of my lifestyle or my choices or my history or my past, but really I can step in and say, this is what I have to offer my people and this is what I have to offer my ohana. And we do amazing things today because of that mentality that so many of us have had. We've created, my generation created the public charter schools in Hawaii, which has taught so many Hawaiian children how to speak their own language. I can walk around Hilo on the Big Island and walk around the grocery store and hear mothers speaking to their children in Native Hawaiian in Hawaii again. And that was lost for so many generations. My parents and their parents didn't have the advantage of speaking Hawaiian in their own home because it had been lost. And the next generation after me has that privilege again. And once we're able to have our language wrapped up in our everyday lifestyle, I believe that we have a completely different relationship to the land that we live on and to other Native people and to our own people. We interpret things completely different. We see things for what they are in a Hawaiian centric type of way or in a Polynesian centric type of way. And I think that is what is changing so much about the movement for Hawaiian self-determination and Hawaiian protections of sacred spaces and cultural practices is because so many in my generation and the generations after me are now speaking our language again. And they're ready to fight and lay down to protect our future. And we saw that at Mauna Kea. And I believe that that what that movement did was it brought together so many other Hawaiians that had not had the opportunities to send their children to Hawaiian public charter schools or had not had the opportunity to learn cultural practices on their own. And it took them to the mountain. It took them up to Mauna Kea, where people wanted to be there and they wanted to protect not only the Mauna, but they wanted to protect the people that were protecting the Mauna. And we were immersed in culture. It really wasn't about holding up picket signs and holding up and holding up ropes and blocking people out and laying down and protesting the way that we typically see. We were in ceremony. We were practicing Native rituals that our kupuna had done. And it really was a ignition of what our religion, what our Hawaiian religion looked like. And I think that it moved me. And I had always been, like I said, a hula dancer. You know, you walk through these our language, and you walk through our mele, and you walk through our dance, and it's a part of my family's life. My mother, my grandmother, her mother, and mine. But I got a different relationship with it after that. I stopped looking at the beauty of hula, and I stopped looking at the talent and the skill of hula, and I really looked at the ceremonial purpose of hula and what that really brought to us as a people, and the stories that it told, and the energy that it built up and sent out. And I think that that is something that many Hawaiians learned since the Mauna Kea movement, just 2 years ago, just before COVID. And it brought together not only the people here on Hawaii Island and across the Hawaiian chain, but it also brought my family home. You know, we jump on Zoom every Thursday, and my auntie's camera is on, and I see in the background she has the Kukia Imauna sign hanging from her banister in her living room, and I'm just like, that is her connection, and that is their way of being a part of this. And Amasa, I love what you said about, you know, connection to the land and Polynesians, and Maddie, you could correct me if I'm wrong. I'm confident to say that even, you know, Native people from Mokuhonu, we use the stars and the skies as our map and as our navigator. And so I know that I could look under the same stars and the same moon and the same sun as my family on the other islands, and my aunties and uncles and cousins on the west coast of Mokuhonu, and know that we're connected and we can map ourselves to each other that way. And that is a cultural practice that not only brought us here to these islands, but helped us to thrive. It helped us to fish. It helped us to garden. It helped us to monitor, you know, even our own relationship with each other, with cool season and lono season. And it helped us to navigate our relationship with our families when they're so far away in the diaspora. So I love that we get to know these things that have been lost for so many generations in Hawaiian culture.
And I think one thing we forgot about, you know, the ways that we uplift each other as Indigenous people is our food. Particularly in the Pacific, we're in the Pacific region, how we love our food so much. Me, for one, I love the taroro leaves with coconut milk, and how it's cooked with, oh, with lovely taros and cassava, or will it be with fish?
Sis, I'm not gonna lie to you. That's what we're having for dinner. I'm literally having palusami for dinner tonight. Taro and coconut milk, Henny, with
As we're having this
homage to
conversation,
the Irish
yes,
people.
and as we're having this conversation, my friends texting me, "Oh, just seeing people talk, I feel like I want to have fish for dinner." And I'm like, "Oh, we better have fish tonight." So I'm like, we should go
No.
to whatever fish we're having tonight. And I also just wanted to share you know, I share the same sentiment as you both. And I remember back in 2016 when Fiji hosted the first ever Pacific Feminist Forum, and you know, it was a groundbreak when we had transgender women that, you know, full force came in to be part of the feminist movement because of the tremendous work paved by older transgender women, the likes of Sulikwanga, Ronnie Ravundi, and Eronin Dina. You know, these are amazing group of trans feminists who have paved the way for us, for me, as for someone that came into the movement very late. And to me, just to see the tremendous work that's been paved, and to be part of the Pacific Feminist Forum and to have conversations with, you know, very radical indigenous Fijian women. Particularly, we had a session on weaving knowledge with traditional women, and then we had one of the most paramount chiefs in Fiji, Andifina Tambakodoro, and we were having conversations about, you know, throughout throughout the feminist movement, so much talks about solidarity, and then there's no real form of solidarity within the feminist movement because you keep excluding trans lived realities within the feminist movement. You keep taking us out from the narrative. And to talk about solidarity, you really need to mean it has to be meaningful when you talk about solidarity within the social movement. It's not a beautiful word where where it's continuously used and but you don't mean it. And it moved her. And she looked at me and she said, "Where are you from?" And then I said, "Oh, I'm from Tailevo." And we were from the same province with Andy Fina Tabakozoro. And then she told me, "You know what? You're coming to our next you're attending the next province meeting in from your village. It's so the Song of Akamarama, it's okay. It's an organization for Indigenous women, the first ever women's organization to be formed in Fiji, and this was only for Indigenous women." And she said, "You're coming to attend it." I was like, "What? You No, you're coming with me." And then I walked into the room the day that we went. They were all Indigenous Fijian women, and then there was this young trans sitting amongst them, and just I felt like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And then I was introduced, and then they were so loving and caring. I thought I was going to get beat up, because in Fiji, the culture of Vakasalela or transgender women is seen negatively, even though our constitution and laws protect us as LGBTQI people, particularly transgender people. But then the realities are different. And so I was sitting there so nervous because I'm in a traditional village, and in my wearing a traditional dress worn by women, and just to see their support and love change the whole narrative, and that we belong, whether we're Indigenous. Being Indigenous is so powerful because we connect to each other in language and in feelings. And to see these beautiful women who are also mothers and grandmothers to me was so beautiful to see the acceptance. And to me, it's such a big move done in this. And you said it, Keva, about there's a need for more activism work, because activism is very important, whether it be radical or little guerrilla style moving within our communities. But we need activism that will spark change and continue this, beautiful ways of having this Talanoa.
Beautifully
Thank you
said.
all so much. It's so beautiful. So we're going to take a short entertainment break for everyone. And so we have a performer, Leimana Abenes, who is a fierce 52-year-old performer from the northern peninsula of the Hawaiian Islands.
Yes, my tita.
She is an entertainer who sings traditional Hawaiian music and has had the opportunity to perform and travel throughout Hawaii, the Polynesian Triangle, and the United States. She sees this performance as her responsibility and mission and purpose to life and her people and to the world. So thank you all. What a beautiful performance. Okay, so for our next question is, how are your communities fighting back against climate change and adapting to survive? And also, what is the importance of Indigenous folks leading the fight for real change when it comes to climate justice?
Well, we have always had the answer to the climate situation. We have, as Indigenous people, we were thriving before people came over here and told us that we were living wrong. And people came over here and told us what we were going to do with our land. We had an amazing system to sustain our people and not rape their resources at the same time. And and for me, that's the biggest part of what has happened because of colonization across many different lands in around the world. And here in Hawaii, you know, the the practice of taking care of a local i'a, or a fish pond. The fish pond could feed the whole ahupua'a, and all of the vegetation that was grown within an ahupua'a could feed everybody who lived within that ahupua'a. And if there was a need for something outside of that living space, then there would be the barter system worked tremendously well. There was no need for monetary value on natural resources. There was no need to take from somebody else to gain. There was no need to divert water. None of that stuff. We actually diverted water into our lo'is to feed our kalo, and then diverted the water back into the stream to put it back where it was. And so we have always had the answers to addressing the global situation on climate change, and the fact that we've lost so many resources, and so many species have become endangered in native places across Hawaii and Polynesia and Mokuhonu. It's all the answers have always been there. I heard somebody say once, not too long ago, like, just imagine, you know, these Hawaiians, you know, 6'4", even the women were like 6 feet tall, and we had this beautiful brown healthy skin and all of our teeth and long thick dark hair, and there were tons of us. Everybody was having babies, like huge amounts of people. And here comes these, you know, huge ships from, you know, trees that were raped out of the forest. And these little men come off, and they're dirty, and they didn't have any, sorry if I'm offending anybody, but they're dirty, and they didn't have any teeth, and they're short, and they were disease infested, and they were filthy, and they were malnourished, and heavy smokers, so they couldn't breathe very well. And these are the men that came to our shores to tell us that we were living wrong. You look at our thriving people, and then you look at these sickly men that said, you know, here, follow us, and this is what and it was all because they had guns. And it was all because they had these big ships that caused intimidation and influence, right? You know, I think that they should have learned from us rather than them trying to teach us something.
Totally. I totally agree with that. And with climate change, depending on how somebody looks at it too, because you mentioned resources. So some of the resources that they found on our land, such as oil and gas and other stuff, they've utilized that also too. So that's a part of that climate change. And I think there are groups and younger generations who are stepping up to combat, like fracking, or don't take any more land to try to get these resources that could harm our lands, like that whole episode with Keystone Pipeline and the arrests that were done in North Dakota, and having to look at that, and just seeing that, and being somebody who was Native and Indigenous, and having people who were protecting the land, and knowing that that's what they were doing, but others who were on the outside were making it sound like they were the antagonists, or they're the people that were causing the trouble. But there was a reason why they were standing up and stepping up to what they believed in. And I think a lot of our indigenous people have that feeling, but I think because of colonization and Western views, a lot of that has changed, and I think it'll take a lot more to change some of these views and the ways, and looking at these movements and climate change, because a lot of stuff is being done, like factory smoke or stuff that's burning is killing the ozone layer or melting the ice and the glaciers, and things are changing. Oil spills are affecting shores and waters and rivers and different things. So I think we're here to we were taught to protect Mother Earth. And looking at Mother Earth, like sometimes when I see like a huge gap, like when they're digging for coal or something, it hurts, because for me, I feel the land is Mother Earth. By digging up those coals, you're hurting her, you're making a gash in her, you're giving her a wound. And for me as an indigenous person, feeling that I'm connected to the land, and then also how the things that I was taught growing up comes from a Western perspective. So looking at in our traditional ways and our traditional concepts, how do we continue to utilize that, or how do we relearn those things? Like one thing that pops in my head is like planting of corn in the fields. Like I didn't get it then, but I get it now, of why we planted so much at a certain time, and separating what we could eat, and then also storing what we can save later to eat with certain things, and understanding that concept too is part of that, thriving for ourselves and not harming our lands. And I think one of the biggest things around my area, and I could say personally, is the uranium spill that happened near where I lived. And we were told not to play in the water. But as kids, what do? You still play in the water. You still run around and splash in that water.
Sure.
Exactly. And so doing that and not knowing the health and the health harm that could cause generations down the road, that people are still getting sick because of that. So that's a part of hurting our climate also too, is that's hurting the water sources, and it's changing the climate from where we live also too, because it comes from the land, because the animals eat the land, we use the animals, or we use the plants, and all of it's interconnected in a way.
Yeah, and I concur with you both. And I know the work on climate. I mean, the work on climate justice. It's a collective one, because it's the survival of communities, families, and it's also about our ways of life. And because as Pacific Island people, or as Indigenous people, we're at the forefront, of climate injustice. And it has to do with our daily lives, the way we live every day, like you both have explained. And I would speak on the Pacific, because the Pacific right now is facing the brunt of what the global North are doing. Countries like America and Europe are doing, and then the Pacific is not even um, you know the Pacific is now facing the brunt of what big countries are doing. And to see that islands like Vanuatu and Kiribati are sinking, and to see children putting bags of sand at the shore at the shoreline to block the rise of seawater. And to me, that's so, it's to see that people, the Pacific Island, are not drowning, but they are fighting, for survival, and that there's no such thing as Planet B, or it's being assumed that Pacific people need to move. No, there's no such thing as moving from our land, because this is where we are. And I know, particularly in Fiji, 3 villages have moved to higher grounds because of the rise of sea level. And they've relocated. And so the government of Fiji has put together what they call the National Relocation Guidelines. And so after they've moved villages to higher grounds, they build new homes for villagers. After building these lovely new homes, there weren't any kitchens. So you get to see the huge connection with how government are so ad hoc with what they do and move people around and think it's so easy to move indigenous people, I mean, landowners from one land to another. But then the people leave what, I mean, they leave the particular land with so much resources that they've put into. And people think that it's so easy just to move people away from where they've grown, where their ancestors have, planted knowledge. And fishing is so easy because it's right by the ocean. And now, women have to even travel further to go fishing. And it's problematic that there's a huge disconnection that communities are not consulted in terms of how policies on climate change should look like. And right now in the Pacific, the work around loss and damage, at COP23, I want to cuss at COP, but at COP26, we've seen that there's so much lies. Big countries are still lying to small island countries because small island countries will have to pay so much brand because of what big countries are doing. And again, the conversation around loss and damage is that there's a need to have loss and damage at that level so that they know that Pacific Island communities are already living our daily realities of having to see all like everything lost. There's food resources that are that are lost, that we can no longer plant a certain crop at certain particular month because of the rise of sea level into the soil and how it affects that. And that the change in weather pattern. But the beautiful thing about this is that we see young people that are doing activism work in saying that we are not drowning, but we are fighting. And to see young Pacific Island warriors doing this amazing work to combat climate justice. And I also want to raise a very important issue. And this is, to me, is one of the very most important, very emotional one, because when you're from the Pacific, as much as climate change is so important, we look at countries like West Papua who are losing their identity, who are being killed every day because of being who they are. They are being killed in their own land as West Papuan people. And as much as we talk about climate change, the importance of it, but we also talk about a group of Pacific Island people that are losing their identity. They're being killed every day by the Indonesian army because they share the same border, and then it's been taken over by the Indonesian government. And so I know that the Pacific region and Pacific leaders are taking, lead in this work, in trying to do work to protect West Papuan people, because as like I've said, as much as climate change is important, West Papuan people are also equally important because of who they are and how are they part of the Pacific diaspora. And I also want to say that we all should continue our work on climate change because it's important. Because we live and breathe like the mana through the way we celebrate on this land. And because this is the same land, we do our traditional meke, our hula, and also we get to eat our beautiful polisami and enjoy earth oven food. And I think it's important that we continue the work on climate change because it's important for indigenous people.
Thank you. Thank you. So for the next question, if you all could please take a moment and highlight any movements that you're aware of that support Indigenous communities, and more specifically, are there opportunities of growth where something like funding could be used to help with those movements?
Oh my, offhand, I can think of so many movements across the Hawaiian Islands that really address the environment. um, like I said earlier, I think COVID really kind of helped people wake up. We had time to kind of think about like what's really important to us. And we at home, and my family's important, and food sustainability is important, and and we've become a, a place where we really rely um, on shipment to come in to provide for us. We relied on the big barges to come in with more food and more poultry and more meat and more vegetables and all of these different supplies that we have been able to get for ourselves for thousands of years right here in these islands. And yeah, the population has changed here. And we're well over 2 million people in population here in the Hawaiian Islands. However, I really think that when we look internally into our ohana, um, when we look at the huge, vast spaces of agricultural space and land that we're able to really use if we just took the time to do it, and that has woken up in the last couple of years, partly because of COVID, partly because of climate change, partly because of the reawakening of the Hawaiian um, responsibility to land, all of those things. Um, the Aloha Aina movement is not something that's new. The Aloha Aina movement started in the late 1800s during the time of the Hawaiian monarchy's overthrow, and and the concept of Aloha Aina is really twofold. The love of the land and the land's love for me, and we see it in so many of our Olelo no Eao, or our Hawaiian proverbs, right? Where it talks about how Hawaiians are really just the stewards of this land, and the land is really the master of this plantation, right? And how uh, genealogically in our kumulipo, in our story of creation, how we are connected not just because our blood and our ancestors are here and buried in this space, but really because our akua told me that this is my sibling, that this land, that this kalo, that this mountain is really my 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 ancestral blood, and it gives us a different dedication and a different responsibility when we look at something like, oh, that's my ohana, even if I disagree with what that ohana is doing at this moment, like say a lava flow or earthquake or a storm. I gotta go take care of my ohana over here. And I think that that's the kind of mentality that we're able to have when we learn and understand our future, or our history and our culture and our scriptures like the kumulipo and our Hawaiian mythology and proverbs, and those stories that had been passed down for generations and generations, so diligently by our kupuna. Um, when they gave us a paper and a pen, we stopped learning the stories that our kupuna was telling us for thousands of years. We stopped paying attention to what the hula was really about, and we just started looking at the hands and the hips. But really, these were the ways that we perpetuated who we were and what we believed in, and how we practiced our responsibility to those things that we believed in. So looking into the different things like Kalahui Hawaii, who does a lot of food sustainability activism and Hawaiian rights activism across the Hawaiian Islands. Um, nonprofit organizations like Aina Momono and the Pa'i Foundation, who make a lot of contributions into the advancement of culture and the connection to land, and really taking Aina Momona is a wealthy land, is healthy and plentiful and opulent, and that's what Aina Momona really talks about. Um, those two nonprofits I specifically can think of, and then you look back to the activism movement that really kind of woke up the world, is the Kukia Imauna, the protection of Mauna Kea, and the opposition of this 30-meter telescope that was desecrating the sacred space on top of the tallest mountain in the world from sea level. And the participation that we got from countries all over the world and from celebrities like Jason Momoa and Dwayne Johnson, and others that didn't have Polynesian ancestral connections to Mauna Kea. But what it really did was it really woke up a lot of people, uh, whether they were Polynesian, Hawaiian, or not, to say, what is sacred? What is the definition of sacred? And who gets to define what that sacredness looks like? And who gets to define how we malama that sacredness? Um, that's what Mauna Kea and the movement really did for us. Was really, it made us think about, like, hey, have we really ever had to go? Think about it in our generation, like seriously, have we really ever had to go full fledged, ride or die, bullets out, fist up, ready to kawe, um, in an activist movement in our generation? We didn't really see that until the pipeline protests at Standing Rock. We didn't really see that until we saw our kupuna laying in the road at Mauna Kea. And they were saying to each other, and they were saying to the opposition, we do not care what happens to us. We are willing to lay our lives down to protect this land, to protect this space, to protect our future. And that is something that I think as a child growing up, I never really had to challenge myself with. What am I really willing to lay down for? And during the Mauna Kea movement, I think I, myself, and so many others really kind of had to ask ourselves that question. And the question for me was, without a doubt, I've lived a great life. I've had great adventures, and I've done really amazing things, and I've done really shitty things in this land and in my time. But if there's one thing that I know is that Hawaiian history has told me that my people have experienced a great amount of loss. And that if I don't learn anything from their history, then I'll just go on about my day and carry on and kiki and have a great old time. Or I'm going to get my ass up on that mountain, get ass up on that podium at the legislation, and I'm going to stand up with my people. And by any means necessary, I'm going to prevent these people from desecrating land. That is the reason why it's sacred, is because it's a water source. How is that so hard to understand? It's the source of 75% of this island's water. If that's not sacred, then I'm sorry, colonizer, what is sacred to you folks? Water isn't sacred. It helps your children just as much as it's helped my family's children. And so it's the idea that we really do have a responsibility to kind of look deeper within ourselves and say, what am I willing to risk and how far am I willing to go to protect what I know is sacred to my family? Food is sacred, land is sacred, and culture is sacred. And if I define it in that space, and if I define it like that in my head, then my values and my history and my ohana tells me I have nothing but fight to do for this movement. And it means that we have to. If we have to stand up against other Hawaiians that don't agree with it, then that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
If we have to stand up against colonizers who continue to perpetuate the colonized ideals, then that's what we have to do. And if it's standing on top of a cold mountain, not letting a construction site, construction workers pass on this road, then that's what we're gonna do. And mahalo for that wake up, because that's what is going to ensure that my kids and my nieces and nephews and their kids still know what it means to be Hawaiian.
And I think I also wanted to raise just a few points before I move on. Is that I guess we talk so much about the importance of traditional power and knowledge and all that, and to me, it's also there's a need to have also some sort of uncomfortable conversation within different contexts within our culture and tradition, is that there's a need to have a conversation on the acceptance of, you know, trans identities, and especially within the LGBT community, that most of the time, um, being part of a community where we are further marginalized and stigmatized and moved to the margins of society. I think it's important also within our traditional setting, like wherever we're from, it's also important to bring up the uncomfortable conversation, the need to support, marginalized communities like ours. And I just want to share some light on a research done by Rainbow Pride Foundation Fiji, which is called Down by the River Research. And this was done after a Category 5 cyclone hit Fiji, and it is one of the biggest ever cyclone in the southern hemisphere to ever hit the Pacific, which hit Fiji. And the research really brought to light the lived experiences of LGBTQI people post disaster, and to see that LGBTQI people, we were blamed for the causes of disaster. We were blamed for bringing climate change into our country. We were refused humanitarian services. And when we did these surveys, we saw that a group of lesbian women didn't go to evacuation centers because of discrimination. They were going to be discriminated because why are two women together and two women having a child? And gay men couldn't even go because of the discrimination in place. There were a group of transgender women that stayed in bathrooms and toilet, or the fear of going into evacuation homes because they were treated badly. And so there's a need, like, for all of us, as we are beacons of hope in our own, in our own islands and within our tribes, is that we need to shed more light on the need to have so much uncomfortable conversation, because the uncomfortable conversations are the hard ones to have, but it's the most thing that's threatening our lives. And I think we need to have more of that, and to see that out of this research, to see that our people are so resilient, LGBTQI people are so resilient in our own ways, and to see that they've come out of a I mean, in most disaster places, having to provide for their own, having to survive with each other, and to see that organizations in Fiji like Diva for Equality, Rainbow Pride Foundation, and Hearts Chameleon, they were doing tremendous work into outreaching, supporting communities in Fiji that were forgotten because of our sexuality and our identity. And to really see that the blame, that the wrath of God that has come to us because being LGBT is a sin, and that because of our truths and our realities is the reason why climate change is coming. But then it's different. Because of this research work, um, Rainbow Pride Foundation has opened a new set of conversation where now faith-based have come on board to share the good word, that we are all children of God and we all should be loved equally. And I think this particular research is a groundbreaking one, because it was able to open up resources and help for our community. And it's a great way of having to use it as a toolkit of how we work within communities pre, during, and post disasters. And I know that there are organizations around the world that support resources. I know Frida, the Young Feminist Fund, they provide fundings to women and trans organizations that are doing work, whatever it is. They support community and organizations at the ground that are doing amazing work. Yeah.
So for me, what I wanted to add is that there are still, unfortunately, there are going to still be protests where I agree with what both of you said about protecting our land, protecting our waters. Like recently, like with Line 3 in the Great Lakes area, where they were protesting an oil pipeline and tribal lands and around tribal lands and trying to stop that also, which was similar to Standing Rock. So I think as far as funding and getting money, we have to think about the people who stood at the front lines, who got arrested, who are currently in jail or even um, serving prison time right now because of their actions, who we feel that they were doing the right thing, but the opposition um, feels that they're right and us um, protesting and saying that we were wrong. So I think with funding, and when we talk about funding, we also have to factor that in too, is how do we protect our protectors of those protests? How do we support them and how do we keep doing that? I remember during Standing Rock, like I couldn't be there, I couldn't go there, but I donated. I try to donate as much as I could to the protests or try to donate as much as I can. So I think there's many ways that we could look at how we fund things or even funding or crowdsources as to where a protest could be funded if it's environmentally it's if it's done for environment reasons, for change reasons, or if the protest is for trying to save our lands or trying to protect the waters. And I think that's the biggest thing. And Kiva said it, protecting our water, because it trickles down to the water. It's about the water with climate change and also with these protests, because these oils or these gasolines or whatever resources that they're trying to transport or dig up is hurtful to our water source. And as Indigenous people, water source is a big thing in our communities. Now we have to be careful in what we drink or how we drink it. We have to boil the water before we drink it or use it and stuff. So that's harmful and hurtful. And it goes back to what I was saying about Mother Earth. Like the Father Sky provides that rain and brings it down. And we utilize that rainwater for not just crops or planting and growing, but I know Indigenous peoples used to harvest the water, hold it in pots or pottery and utilize that for different things also too. And and so with that question you had asked, I think really looking at how do we fund some of those water protectors that get arrested, how do we support them, and yeah, because I know there's going to be more protests that are going to happen, to be
Oh
honest.
yeah,
Yeah,
Mhm.
we're always fighting for something.
always.
Since colonization started.
Yes.
I think
Thank
that's
you.
difficult, Maddie. The fact that sometimes I get really jaded and really disheartened because I'll open up my social media, I'll open up Facebook, and once again there's another fire to put out somewhere, um, and what a privilege it is to be asked and to be called to these spaces, because of the commitment that we make. um, People say, "Hey, get Kiva. Hey, call Kiva and have her come over." And it's a privilege and to be given that responsibility from your people. But at the same time, it's just like, sometimes I'm sitting there like, oh my God, when is it gonna end? Like, there's always something there. They're fighting up for Ivi Kupuna up in the mountains, and we're fighting over to clean water at Red Hill, and we're fighting to not build over new roadways to go down into sacred valleys, and we're still protecting Mauna Kea, and we're fighting to not have charges brought up against the people that were protesting and blocking the road and that were arrested. And it's just like, it's just never ending. And I guess it comes with self-care, to making sure that, we're replenishing our energies and replenishing our minds and our spirits, so that we can continue, because it is an example that we set for the later generations. And And Amasai, I appreciate you so much bringing up the LGBT piece to all of this activism and then the way that our people look at it, um, because we know that religion did that to us. We look in our history and we look in our songs and we look in the name places, the native names of places in our homelands, and we see that hey, we had some significance, you know, mahus and papafinge and all of the other gender uh, fluid cultures that really kind of embraced us as healers and as strengths for their community and as guides and as cultural advisors and as the healers and as the caretakers and all of these things that they expected of our community, of our LGBT community, of our mahu and um and religion fucked us up. Like religion turned our people against us. I'm so thankful that you know there are those people like those women in that council that you went to and the people that stood behind so many mahu that were being ridiculed in the streets of Honolulu when we were doing activism and all the other people that stand behind and recognize that our indigenous culture, our native culture saw the magic and saw the power that Mahu people have, the duality of being able to live and glide in and out of our feminine and masculine ideology and our feminine and masculine behaviors. Let me pick flowers and dig holes at the same time because that's the feminine and the masculine, right? And our people saw that in history. It's there. You go to places across Hawaii and you see these names. They're like Mahuleia, and you're like wondering, like, why did that place like call that? Why did they name that Mahuleia? Well, what's the point of what's the significance? And I can Lele Mahu Falls in Oahu, and there's so many across the islands. And it just goes to show you that we had a place with our people. And not only did we have a place with our people, but we had a place of reverence with our people.
I want to
And
be part of your people. I
yeah,
want to be part of, having to be celebrated. And
well,
there's a
Sissy, one
saying goes,
day
yeah.
your responsibility, our kuleana, our responsibility as that gender fluid part of our culture is to go find those stories and tell the stories of our mahu kupuna,
Mm,
and that's where the significance is going to be reborn, and that's where people are going to wake up. Those women knew in that room when you went, you know, those
yeah.
women knew, and those stories are there in your history.
Yeah, but it's just listening to you talk about the very important roles Mahu play, within your culture is so uplifting, and it's just the vibrant Polynesian culture is so different, and fuck the colonizers because of what they've done to our region. They've put us into little boxes, and you're a Polynesian because you're fair, silky hair, and we're Melanesians because we're darker with curly hair, and you have the Micronesians who are smaller, and they're fair and also have silky hair. And to me, that's problematic as well. They've put us in our little boxes, and they've politicized our bodies because that's what they wanted us to do, to pick on each other. And every time I cry, just thinking about being Vakasalelewa, which is an indigenous term for transgender women. But it's also some sort of term that, we have to take ownership of. Vakasalelewa also would mean, a boy acting like a girl. And to me, it's still derogatory because I am what I am, and sometimes it's so hard having to explain more and having to use Western terminology to kind of define how my cultural identity should look like. And I think it's important as as Pacific Island people, I think we need to kind of weave this traditional knowledge together and then put it in a beautiful box and maybe give it to the gods to kind of give back this mana and power that that culturally within our villages, that Vakasala Lawas and Laities and Fafafinas and Mahu do exist, and then that stories should come back. But then for us in Fiji, it's always seen as for trans people, like the reality is that trans people are killed. Like in Fiji, I've seen 2 years in a row that trans people have been killed, reported, no justice served. And there was a murder in Samoa of a young trans woman, killed, justice not served. And to me, it's like, for how long we're going to see our people die? And how long will we continue to use the traditional explanation where people don't really get that we are part of your culture, we are part of you, we are no different from you. We live with you.
Mhm.
And sometimes we have, like, sometimes I get so tired of being too radical and being too political, and that we put so much of our body and energy into it. And Keva, you said so much about self-care, and it's really important. We as activists need to take a lot of that, because we all continue to be at the forefront of saying this is what we want, this is what our people need. And just being here in the US, it scares me to see the amount of transgender people, particularly transgender women, who have been killed over the past 5 years.
Mhm.
It scares me a lot. And to me, is how long will we keep counting for? And I think it's organizations like Utopia, that needs to kind of be our beacons of hope. We need to partner with Utopia to bring out, the amazing work that they do, and bring in our communities to be part of Utopia, and to strengthen this work of finding ourselves, the work on human rights and gender, particularly that, and just being celebrated. I'm tired of being tolerated. I want to be celebrated. And
Exactly.
that should be the foundation of how we continue to how we coexist, how we co-facilitate, how we co-live in this world. And so much of that's been said, but to me, we need to put words into action. So to me, it's like, after this Talanoa, like, what's after this? What do we do post Talanoa, Indigenous people in connection to our land? And this is where we all hold ourselves accountable. Like, I hold every time I hold myself accountable into the community that I serve. And I'm so thankful having to move to Seattle, having to be rekindled with the work on social movement and social justice work is so important. For
Mhm.
too long, I've been disconnected, and now that I've found Utopia, which is so loving and so caring, everyone that works here, people like Dell and Heavenly and Taffy and Diana, who do amazing work in Utopia, and I would like to acknowledge them. And I think I also want to say that it's critical that we have more of these Talanoa sessions, because it's Talanoas like this that spark movements, and it strengthens what Kevin said. It strengthens our activism and our work. And I would say that it's a privilege being amongst my ancestors, Keva and Mate.
Yeah, I wanted to add also to the fact of self-care, and then also being like, for me, I, I've been away for 15 years from where I grew up, and something's calling me home. Something's calling me back to be with my people, work with my people. So I'm taking steps now. That's why I'm in school. I'm in school to get a paper that can help me back home with my people and working in substance abuse or use. There are plans that I want to continue some of that ceremony that I'm talking about. one of the things that I shared with my sister Kathy is that I want to create Grandma Maddie's. I want people to come to Grandma Maddie's, where it's a hogan where ceremonies can happen, where protection prayers can be done, where healing can also be done with fellow medicine people that I know, who I trust, that could do ceremonies with Native LGBTQ populations, specifically for my Diné LGBTQ people who sometimes may go home to ceremonies and be ostracized. So there are plans that I want to do to preserve that. And you talk about the celebration of who we are. It's so true that people forget that. And colonization and Western views has really like beat us up on that and try to like make us invisible, and not just as Native people, but as Native LGBTQ populations, and doing the best that they could, and also twisting stories. Even my own people say that I don't exist. Even my people say that it's wrong to be who I am. But deep down in my heart, and learning my culture and learning my language and my traditions, like you can't say that because I am of the people, because I have a clan system, and even though we're not blood related, we are clan related. So whoever is a naysayer of me is still going to be my sister or my brother or my grandmother or my father or whatsoever, and how we describe each other. So yeah.
Yeah, I really like that because I always think like in the communities I'm a part of, I always tell them like we can't actually have healing in the Indigenous community if we aren't also uplifting the voices of, I know that we say Two Spirit, but like in my community is Winkte. There's actually no healing because traditionally we were the healers. Like we were the folks who did the naming ceremony, who in a lot of Indigenous cultures where raising the children, doing marriage ceremonies, we're the healers, we're the medicine men. Like, so it's our folks, so I always think there's no way to have, healing within our broader Indigenous communities if we aren't uplifting our trans and two-spirit and gender diverse folks. And I also wanted to add on to the self-care part that I really think, like, I've been thinking a lot about that. And I really think that like a modified version of that, more of like community care. Because I feel like so many times a lot of our leaders and folks in community who are like leading movements and organizing, like there's never an opportunity for them to do self-care. And like, what would it look like if as a community we were like supporting that and giving them the opportunity to be able to like take that rest, to be able to take the time off, to maybe not be the one who's the face of like this thing. Because through so many conversations, I see so many of especially our trans and two-spirit and Fa'afafine folks leading so much and never actually having that opportunity to do self-care. And so it's like, what would like a community care model look like where we're like actually, wrapping around someone and say like, you need to rest, you need to like take care. Here's like some mutual aid funds to like go on a vacation and like get a massage or something, whatever that is. So we are at the last 2 minutes, but I just wanted to know if anyone could quickly answer the last question, and that is, what do you see as the future of land sovereignty and its impact on Indigenous communities?
That's a tough question. That's a heated question for Hawaiians and many other cultures as well.
Would that be the topic of land back?
I think so.
And I think
Give
that
it back so we can show you how it's supposed to be done.
Yeah, I think that's clearly like said with land back. I actually want one of those t-shirts, either land back or you are in stolen land. And I think land sovereignty is very important because we look at land differently than people who are on the outside on what land is. We don't put a price on land. We're supplied by our Mother Earth, and we look at it in that sense. So land sovereignty, I think people can look at it in different ways, but I think being a part of this land, I think helps us to be who we are and where we come from and having that knowledge. But with Western concepts, we've learned how capitalism is a big part of those decisions that we make in how they look at our land. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about land sovereignty, I think that we, as the Indigenous people, have the responsibility to learn more. Many of the cultural values and practices and beliefs, they've been lost over time, over generations, and by so many. And I think that with sending out the call, sending out that kahea that, yeah, we want this land back and we want to do it right, um, requires us to have a serious kuleana to what we're trying to stand for. Don't give it back to us so we can fuck it up, because of a generational trauma and historical trauma, and the fact that we don't have the resources or the know-how to sustain ourselves and to sustain ourselves and govern ourselves. Um, we have a huge responsibility to regain the things that we've lost, the lessons, the values and the practices that we've lost, in order to somehow go back to a small remnants of who we were as a thriving people in Pacifica.
Yeah, I think it's just simple as like leave us and our lands alone. And if you want to do something like no, there's a need to kind of there's a need to always consult people and indigenous people. And I think about the relocation, and every time I think about it, I laugh because um, there were no consultation with women. You move people to new land without even asking them, like, is this particular land okay? And you move groups of people to different land and you build them homes with no kitchen. It shows how you don't recognize the hard work our mothers and grandmothers have put in terms of where they're moving from to a different set of land. And so I think it's important in how you two said it.
Yeah, I think also too, like especially with indigenous communities, like if they say that there's sacred land that's owned by somebody else, and it should be given back because it's sacred lands. Like for example, Mount Rushmore in the Black Hills,
Mm.
that
Yeah.
should be given back, and presidents' faces shouldn't have been carved on that because there's already a meaning behind that for indigenous peoples and the grandfathers from the yeah, it was a sacred site, but it was used differently. So I think there's a lot of places where that has happened, where land has been taken and people not caring about what it meant to indigenous peoples. And part of that relocation of our tribes is a part of that too, because some of our tribal communities, when we have like 577 in the US, and then also you have to look at Alaska, like how many tribes were misplaced from their original lands, moved, and how do you look at that, and how do we look at land sovereignty for them? How do we give those lands back? And I'm hearing some conversations and seeing people giving back a little bit of the land, but that's only a little bit. More should be given.
And this is
There's a bill that's getting ready to be talked about in our local legislature, and it's about our own Department of Hawaiian Homelands and the commitment that Prince Jonakuhio Kalaniana Ole made as a senator to really dedicate federal lands, which was ceded lands, to back to Hawaiian people and make it attainable for us to actually own property in our own homeland. And the list, they judge it by blood quantum, how much Hawaiian you have, and you can have this land if you have a certain amount of Hawaiian, which is crazy. But that's the American way of really kind of judging on how worthy are you. Let's go by your how much blood you have, how much Hawaiian blood do you have, or Native blood you have. So that's a whole nother long conversation of trauma that they're inflicting on Hawaiian people. But this list of people that have signed up for Hawaiian homestead land has gotten so long. Thousands, tens of thousands of people on this list. Some of them have been on the list for 25, 30 years. My grandmother died on the list. as so many other grandparents died on the list. And so now there's this proposition that let's pay people out. They've been on the list for so long. Let's pay them $100,000 so that they can do with the $100,000 what they lose, and then they can take their name off the list. Property value for the median value of a home in Hawaii is over $1 million today. And you want to pay Hawaiians $100,000 to get off this list to get homestead land. And there's Hawaiians that are like, I'll take the money. I'll take the $100,000. I'm like, baby, you can't even buy a 1-bedroom apartment with $100,000. Like, we don't even know our own worth in our own land. And they put the monetary value on it. And when it's monetary value going towards Hawaiians, it's worth $100,000. When it's monetary value going towards Japan, it's worth $10 million. And it's just a disgusting concept that we don't even sometimes recognize that we're still colonized, and they're still like inflicting colonized pain on us. And so many people just like, what can you do? And I'll just take the money and we're gonna go invest. And it's just like, if we continue to kowtow, if we continue to turn a blind eye to the fact that they didn't just steal our kingdom 129 years ago, they continue to steal right from underneath of us, continuously on the Mauna and right in our own front yards. If we don't recognize that, people are not going to get angry enough. Because 129 years, they're paying not so hard, after 129 years. But 5 minutes ago, they was just offering you $100,000 for $1 million properties.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll go get mad.
I know Maddie just mentioned it, but like the Mount Rushmore and the Black Hills, like the Sioux tribe was offered, I think they won a settlement in the 80s for $100 million, and right now it's around like $1.3 billion, and they refuse. The Sioux tribe is one of the poorest tribes in the area, and they refuse the money because they're like, we don't want the money, we just want our land back. And so when I always think about this, it's like the simplest word, like the sentence land back, but it's so hard for people to conceptualize what we really mean. And it's like, no, we literally mean like land back. Like, I can't remember who said it, but like, just go leave us to our land and go, let
us have it.
Does anyone else have any last words before we wrap up?
Such a great conversation with all of you beautiful people.
Mahalo.
Yes.
So much knowledge gained and so much received.
Thank you all so much. Thank you all so much for being in this conversation with me. It was such a pleasure to be able to hear your all's brilliance, and I'm sure everyone else who is listening feels the same way.
Mahalo to Leimana, your beautiful Leo. Thank you, my tita. I'm so happy that you joined us for your entertaining voice. Mahalo, Sissy.
Thank you, everybody, for being on and participating.
Thank you. And thank ourselves for being here.
Thank you. Happy Girls' Day, everybody. Well,
yes.
Out there. Happy International Women's Day. To all of you that jump on that boat.
And again, I just want to say thank you again to Utopia for allowing us to have this very important conversation and very needed. And hopefully there's a episode 2, and then having people having different discussions. And it's very important that we continue these very important conversations. Thank you.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Mahalo to Utopia. I'm so amazed and so proud of all the work that you do. Trans-led, trans-organized, trans-executed. It's amazing. So much mana in the offices there. I cannot wait to come visit sometime soon.
Me too.
And I just wanted to go back to what Maddie had said earlier about the U.S. Trans Survey. Since we're here and since this is our experience, it's really important that we participate. It's coming soon. Find your local organizations that serve the trans community, and hopefully they can steer you in the right direction. They're working with the right people. In order to get this survey out. This is how we get counted, and this is how we get resources and funding for ourselves. So please participate wherever you are.
Yeah, so it's actually going to roll out on May 16th.
Yeah.
And we had a meeting today at 2:00, and they actually gave numbers of like pledges that people are going to take the survey. And I had asked about people from Guam and the Pacific Islands, and I think they got pledges from just Samoa, American Samoa Islands, or Samoa, that region. So getting the word out and taking pledges and doing the trans survey, I think gives us voice as Indigenous people also too, because that's why we have a team now that we're working on that. So tell everybody to fill out the survey come May 16th. It's important for us because of our history and where we're going forward.
And I also wanted just to last say that a very important day is coming up at the end of this month. It's the International Transgender Day Visibility. And I know Utopia must be doing something, and I think it's only nice if we all could have something like this and celebrate online with people that we cannot be with together physically, but also to celebrate using this platform. And it's so important that we do that, because to me it's always important to pay tribute to leaders who have been here, who've kind of paved the way for a lot of us.
Another announcement is that March 20th is National Native HIV Awareness Day, and that's the beginning of spring. And I will be in Hawaii for the beginning of spring.
Thank you. And before we go, I'm just going to give a couple of announcements from Utopia's team and the amazing work that they're doing. So a coming up event is in collaboration with their sister organization, Pika Washington. They are hosting a POSIVA fundraiser happening April 2nd at Trinity Church Gym in Kent, Washington. And that it will be from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. And the fundraiser is to support the Tongan siblings who are recovering from the devastating effects of the volcano eruption and tsunami. So please come out and support. They're also selling food plates for $25. And so if you'd like to hear more information and get more information about that, you can email del@utopiawa.org. Also, if you are looking to apply for U.S. citizenship, Utopia is here to help. They will be hosting a citizenship clinic at the Utopia office on April 15th. And so if you would like to register or if you would like to volunteer, you can visit utopiawa.org/citizenship-access in order to sign up for that, either for registering or for volunteering. Also, the Sex Worker Empowerment Initiative team is looking for volunteers to help staff in distributing sex safety toolkits and resources to community. So if you are interested in doing that and seeking ongoing service, you can also fill out that intake form on their website. And a few special announcements from Utopia Washington's wellness team. And they have a Project DoorDash, which is in collaboration with DoorDash, where you can get food delivered to your house. And so they have food items and boxes for qualifying residents. And so you have to live around 10-mile radius around the Kent office. And so generally folks will qualify if they live in the Kent, Edgeway, Berrien, Auburn, or SeaTac area. And so if you'd like more information about that, you can go ahead and contact the Utopia Wellness team. Also, the wellness team is distributing COVID-19 rapid antigen home testing kits, as well as hosting a vaccine clinic from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Kent office. And so if you want more information about any of those services, you can email wellness@utopiawa.org. And last but definitely not least, a special thanks to our sponsors, the City of Seattle Human Services. And so if you all can please take a moment and fill out the survey on the Talanoa event, that would be greatly appreciated. And thank you all so much for attending this. And thank you again to all of our amazing panelists for sharing their brilliance with us.
Thank you.